Hi, I'm Kristen Stewart. I'm the curator of costume and textiles at the Valentine Museum. And we're here to talk about my new exhibition, Ain't Misbehavin, 1920s Richmond. In my last video, I talked about the influence of teenagers and young adults on culture in the 1920s. We learned that young people graduated from high school and college in record numbers during that decade. More young women than ever before had the high school or college degrees that they needed to advance their careers and make a living wage. Today, we're going to talk about the idea of the weekend, a time for relaxation that became a regular part of American life in the 1920s. Prior to that decade, many people worked 7 days a week, but the same labor laws that made education a national priority also set a new standard for a shorter work week. In Richmond, residents needed something to do with all that new leisure time. In addition to going to the movies, as we've already discussed, they vacationed at Virginia's beaches, enjoyed new public recreational facilities, and thanks to the popularity of the very first affordable car, they took road trips on a growing network of brand new highways in the Model T Ford. In Richmond, the black and white communities both enjoyed expanded opportunities for leisure and recreation, but they did so along divided lines of racial discrimination. Throughout the 1920s, the city's white lawmakers upheld Jim Crow laws that perpetuated old patterns of segregation within the new spaces of transportation and recreation. Resort wear is now a regular part of the annual Fashion Week calendar. But before the 1920s, only the very few wealthiest Americans needed a swimsuit or a casual outfit for outdoor activities. The 1920s gave rise to a brand new market, sports and leisure wear, and in doing so, completely transformed ideas about fashion and modesty. Prior to the 1920s, women's swimsuits were extremely modest and looked entirely different than men's swimsuits. Women who could afford to enjoy the beach before the 1920s wore bloomers, a new knee-length swimming dress, and even stockings at the beach. During the 1920s, a knitting company called Jansen invented a wool knit bathing suit designed to maintain its shape while wet, to dry quickly, and to facilitate faster swimming. Women's and men's Jansen suits looked almost identical and showed more of the body than anyone had seen on the beach before. Jansen also introduced the visible logo as a branding idea, and a Jansen swimsuit was instantly recognizable by the Jansen girl applied at the hip. Before the 1920s, knitted fabrics were mostly worn under clothes for warmth, but with the increased popularity of recreational sports, the demand for attractive sports clothing grew. Sweaters became popular for active sports like golfing, hiking, and riding bikes, and soon the soft and comfortable textile was incorporated into fashionable daywear. Without the rise of knitwear in the 1920s, today's athleisure styles might not exist. Another important fashion revolution that women can thank the 1920s for is pants. Prior to the 1920s, the only bifurcated or divided garments for women were bloomers, full trousers that gathered at the knees and were only acceptable for bike riding or with a swimming dress. In the 1920s, young women began to wear bloomers much more often for golfing, hiking, and other active sports. This began a slow introduction of pants into women's wardrobes. In the 1920s, young women began to wear bloomers more often for golfing, hiking, and other active sports. This began the slow introduction of pants into a part of a regular woman's wardrobe. It would still be another 50 years before women would wear trousers at evening or professional events, but thanks in part to the efforts of women in the 1920s, we can finally wear pants whenever we want. We've seen in this video how the rise of new leisure time and activities affected everyday fashion. In our next video, we will talk about what trends affected 1920s evening wear. I'll see you then.